The views and opinions expressed on the Nova Society are those of the panelists and guests and do not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of the Phoenix Research Institute or any institution which any panel member is associated. Reproduction or dissemination other than for the purpose of education or information without the express written permission of the Phoenix Research Institute or Nova Society Media is strictly prohibited. We'd like to welcome everyone back to the Nova Society, and for today's Friday episode, we're going to continue the conversation that we had yesterday in our short episode regarding what the United States' role might be in a full Middle East conflict. Is the Middle East ready for a full war? What is actually going on in the Middle East, and where do Americans stand, if they stand anywhere, when it comes to this Middle East conflict? So, let's listen in.
If no ceasefire can be reached in the Middle East, considering the threats and the rhetoric coming from Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran, and Israel, are we closer to a full-out war in the region?
Well, yeah. Here's the part that I find most disturbing. Do I have a minute?
Yeah, you do. No, you do. I'm sorry. Just and just as a point, Scott, when you're formulating your answer, what would you consider a full-out war?
Okay.
Ooh.
Should be flying.
That wasn't on the script. Wait a minute.
What do I consider a full war? Me and my wife going at it. But everything else is fine. Yeah. So here's the really disturbing thing to me about what's going on in this country and the Middle East right now. Judy Woodruff, who's on PBS news program, whatever they call that these days, the McNeil Era Report, in my mind. Judy Woodruff came out yesterday and said that there's been reporting that Donald Trump has gone to Netanyahu and said, "Do not make peace. It's good. It's too good for Biden. You want me back, and I'll take care of it when I'm president." And I don't know what what Bibi is going to do. Obviously, although I think Israel has agreed to some form of ceasefire that Hamas has now rejected. I don't know how sincere Bibi is about the peace process. Anyway, I'm not a mind reader, but it does seem to me that Trump is taking a page out of the Republican playbook that we've seen before, and we are reminded that LBJ, when he dropped out and said, "I will not accept and seek the nomination of my party," again, spent his time trying to end the Vietnam War. And Nixon considered that an October surprise on behalf of Hubert Humphrey and did everything that he could, which consisted of sending Henry Kissinger to speak to Madame Chenot, who was a very well-known French Vietnamese woman, to tell the South Vietnamese, "Don't make peace now. We'll get you better terms when Nixon is president." And Nixon fooled a lot of people in 1968 into thinking that he was a peacemaker, including probably most famously Abbie Hoffman, who supported Richard Nixon in 1968 because he felt that there was no way that the LBJ Humphrey team was going to end the Vietnam War. And Abbie Hoffman was famously disillusioned by Nixon and came to hate him and protest against him, etc. Then we saw the same thing happen years later when the hostages were in Iran, and Jimmy Carter had a plan to make a deal to get them out. Ronald Reagan felt that that was an October surprise and did what he could, sending George Bush, who was his vice presidential nominee, and some other people, including Governor Connolly from Texas, former Governor Connolly, to tell the Iranians, no, do not release the hostages until after the election. And in fact, the Iranians held the hostages until Inauguration Day, when Jimmy Carter was out, Ronald Reagan was president. They allowed the hostages to go. The story that the Reagan people put out at that time was that the Iranians were so scared of Ronald Reagan and what he might do that they had to release the hostages. The truth, which we only found out later, much later, was that he had made a deal with the Iranians to hold on to the hostages until he was president. And now we're seeing Trump try the same thing in the Middle East. And the question that I have is, Nixon kept the war going on for 5 more years in order to be elected president. He had no plan to end the war. He never did have a plan to end the war. And Trump is playing with fire by telling Netanyahu to keep the war going, because if the war escalates, and if the fighting between Israel and Hezbollah, the fighting between Israel and Hamas, the fighting between Israel and the Houthis, and direct conflict with Iran continues to escalate, there's going to be serious consequences. There are going to be many, many deaths. And who at that point would be the worst human being, Nixon or Trump? Kind of tough to say. It remains to be seen. What do you think, Mark?
Well, yeah, and again, it is a playbook that the Republicans seem to like to use an awful lot. First of all, I think there's a misconception. Now, Tony Blinken, was his 9th visit to the region, and I think that the American populace, once again, not having critically and analytically thinking about this, seems to believe that we have more say than we actually do. They did not secure a peace deal. They did not secure a ceasefire. Tony Blinken basically is on his way back. And here's one of the things that a lot of people just don't get, and this is from the AP. Few details have been released about the so-called bridging proposal put forth by the U.S., Egypt, and Qatar. Blinken said it is very clear on the schedule and the locations of Israeli military withdrawals from Gaza. Okay, that's all we know. We don't know the details of it. Therefore, it's nice to hear that they're going to withdraw. But now the question is, from where? They don't tell you that. And this was rejected by Hamas. So again, you only get half the side of it. But I think that the American populace truly does believe that we have far more control over this than we do. If a ceasefire is going to be agreed upon, Israel or Egypt, Qatar, and the United States can be the brokers, can be there in the room, but Hamas and Israel have to agree to it. We can't agree by proxy for them. And I think this is a major misconception that people have. The only way the United States could solve this on its own is through military. Just go in there and just clean it up and be over and done with. Nobody wants that. The Israelis don't want it. Hamas doesn't want it. The American people don't want it. So the expectations on what diplomacy, remember, we're half a world away. We're on the other side of the globe from this. And the fact is we can only suggest, we can, maybe sweeten the deal a little bit, but the two combatants are the ones that have got to come to the agreement. And they're the most two important people, two most important people in the room. And that's all that there is. That's really all that there is to it. So unless these people that are protesting say we should be doing more, understand exactly what these proposals are, and nobody's going to tell us that. That's all, behind closed doors in smoke-filled rooms. Nobody's going to tell anybody that. You cannot make that determination right now. Now, the idea of, the threats and the rhetoric being back and forth. My attitude is as long as they're just yelling at each other, that's probably a good thing. Let them yell at each other all they want. Let them threaten. They do that very well over there in the Middle East. They're very good at threatening each other. It's when they stop threatening that you have to start watching and saying, oh, something's going to happen. So as long as Hamas and Hezbollah and Iran and Israel are shouting over the wall at each other, that's perfectly fine. My thought is start to worry when they stop, when you don't hear anything anymore. That's when we have to start really being concerned about full-out war happening in the Middle East. And a full-out war would probably in my mind, would bring in outside actors. It's just not going to be Israel against everybody else. We're going to get dragged in. Probably, I don't know if the Russians will actually get dragged into the extent because they've got their hands full in Ukraine and now in Russia. But some of those other Middle Eastern countries are going to be dragged in. Question then is who's for who? And they can be very, very finicky. I'm with them today, but when the shooting starts, maybe not so much. So it's, to me, let them keep yelling at each other. At least they're talking.
I agree. I forget who said it, but jaw is better than war. And as long as they're talking, the main sticking point at this point seems to be the southern Gaza crossing. The Israelis want to have Israeli troops patrolling that corridor, and the Hamas wants the Israelis gone and say that the Egyptians should be the force that holds that line down. The Israelis, of course, don't trust that Egypt is going to be an honest broker because those tunnels have been used to import so much munitions into Gaza that they're simply going to reload and be ready to continue fighting when the ceasefire stops. So a third party is going to end up there, I think, at some point or another. Hopefully it won't be U.S. troops, because that brings to mind Beirut. For those of us who are old enough to remember, and we don't want another Beirut. So I think the main sticking point here is resolvable. It probably would require a force outside of the region to come in and patrol that corridor to make sure that Hamas is using it for peaceful purposes and not to bring in more munitions to restart this war when it becomes a shooting war again.
My understanding is that Netanyahu is making he's saying that he's making reasonable proposals for peace, but he's really not leaving space enough for Hamas to accept peace proposals, at least according to observers over, like the Egyptians and so on and so forth, because it's in his best interest to keep the war going. And if it is so that Trump has gone over there and or has met with Netanyahu, how might that change the dynamic, and what do you feel America's role should be if this whole thing continues to escalate?
Well, I will say this. Netanyahu saying, well, I'm doing this, I'm doing that, is just like Trump saying, I could walk over and in one day get them all together and everybody's going to make an agreement. There's no substance to it. There's just no substance to it. And if Netanyahu is taking the political calculation that Trump in office is good for him because Trump will be to his word, then Netanyahu's an idiot. A bigger idiot than I thought he was. Trump never keeps his word on much of anything. So, yes, it probably is in Netanyahu's best interest to keep this conflict going for now. But like all conflicts, when people in Israel start dying at a higher rate, that patience with Netanyahu is going to go away. I mean, that's really all that there is to it. Again, just to say, well, I'm giving you options here. What are they? What are these options? But again, nobody gets to know these things. It's just like Trump, Trump's proclamation of his ability to negotiate a deal between Putin and Zelensky in 24 hours, it would be done. Yeah, it sounds very nice and utopian, but it's absolutely not realistic in any way. And if Netanyahu's putting his eggs in that basket, boy, he's making a huge mistake.
No doubt about that. The Israelis announced today that they've destroyed more than 150 tunnels along the Egypt-Gaza border area, and that's what they need to finish up before they can start talking about peace, and then they're going to turn their attention to the north of Gaza again. So it seems like it's more like whack-a-mole, and they continue to pound away. At some point or another, hopefully, they get to the point where they're no longer willing to keep putting troops into these areas and instead rely on their intelligence and their technology and other sort of disproportionate measures that they have against their enemies to carry on the rest of this conflict.
So I think the second question you had, Brooklyn, was what is America's role in this? Is that what?
Well, I mean,
if things escalate, well, let's take it one way. I mean, if things can de-escalate, then, as you say, both Hamas and Israel, I mean, they're the ones who need to make the agreement, because they're the ones who have to live with the agreement. Right. I'm sorry, Scott. I know I interrupted you.
I'm done talking.
If, however, the situation escalates into a full war, and my other question is, if Hamas, if Israel doesn't trust Egypt to police these corridors, then who might be an acceptable replacement person? Would Jordan, or would we have to have? I mean, who would be an acceptable person to police that corridor?
Actually, the question really is who would want to? Like Scott said, the United States, we don't want another Beirut.
Right.
And that was in that region, and all the countries in that region saw what happened when Beirut happened. Those of us, as Scott says, are old enough to remember that. Right. What country would want to step up?
Right.
And to say the United Nations, we know that they're ineffective. They're totally ineffective at it.
Right.
They just, because they just take this stand back kind of attitude. So the problem isn't so much, do you trust Egypt to do it, or the question is who are you going to get? The Saudis? Maybe, if you can talk them into it, but it's a lot more complex than that, because you're putting your troops in harm's way. You're basically the wall. You're the Berlin Wall, so to speak. And that's just not a place to be. You're no man's land. And that simply is not a place to be. And I can't think of too many countries, especially now the United States, that would be a disaster here at home. The first U.S. troop that got killed, maintaining that, all hell would break loose here. Politically, socially, because now what's your response? Once you put those troops in that position and something happens, and you know it will, now you have to respond in some way. And I don't think anybody wants, the last world superpower being the one sitting in the middle of this, because that bodes bad for everyone.
Yeah, I agree with everything Mark just said. The best army that could do this would be the Ukrainian army, but they're elsewhere engaged.
That's correct. That is correct. I mean, maybe, you know what who would be a great one to do it? Let the Chinese do it.
What about our role then?
If this was to happen, if war was to break out, I that's really a good question. I really can't say. Um, we're gonna we like proxy wars. We're very good at that proxy thing. Um, and I don't think this is a no-win scenario. This is like go back to Star Trek. This is Kobayashi Maru. No matter which way you go, there's no right answer. Um, because
Right.
our population is, you just cannot win this one.
And Kobayashi Maru was a test of character,
Correct.
not of strategy.
Not of strategy.
Right.
And that's exactly what this is. This is a test of character as far as how we take our responsibilities as a world superpower. Yes, Israel is our ally. Yes, we have allies in the region, but we also have to make the calculation of nothing good can come of this. Nothing good can come of this. And again, there is, and I do know that somebody once said, sometimes you're presented with certain questions and there is no right answer, but you still have to choose. In many ways, maybe the best choice for the United States is, guys, we're out. We've done the best we can. We've done supplies. We've sent money. We've sent humanitarian support. We've helped negotiate and broker deals that might have worked, but nobody wanted to go with it. I guess you're going to have to just slug it out and figure it out at the end, because sometimes that's about all you got.
You mentioned China, and that China did a really interesting thing when Kim Jong-un and Trump were going at it before they became best friends. And what the Chinese did then was they said, look, if the United States bombs North Korea, then the United States is at war with China. But if North Korea bombs or attacks South Korea or the United States in any way, that alliance, then China stands down and allows the United States to obliterate North Korea. Those are the two choices you have. And it turned out to be the perfect answer, because nobody wants to go to war with China and nobody wants to commit suicide. And rational actors, may act irrationally for a while, but eventually come to their senses. The war would escalate to the point where Israel would be attacking Iran directly. That is an hopefully unthinkable scenario. And the United States would be forced to support Israel in that effort. I'm sure Saudi Arabia would join in gleefully at that point to do this, because remember the rifts of religion and so on that exist there. And, I think at some point or another Syria gets involved, and that means that Russia's going to be involved, because Russia's got bases in Syria and has a real stake in Syria's future. It's just, it gets uglier and uglier. And, as I was talking about this, I thought about what Turkey might do, and Turkey might be the perfect responder to the who's going to guard the corridor in South Gaza, because Turkey has sort of, I think Turkey wants to reinvent the Ottoman Empire in the same way that Putin wants to reestablish a Russian empire, right? And we're going way back now. And that this would be a chance for Turkey to show that it can be a big power in the region, which it has not been for quite some time. So that might be something of a solution there, that Turkish troops end up going there and guarding that line with no real love lost for either Hamas or Israel. So I don't know. I mean, the best role for the United States to play is exactly what they're doing right now. Blinken has done a splendid job, I think, of keeping them talking at least. And these demands are not intractable by any stretch. There are solutions to them. and hopefully they can get to them sooner rather than later, and hopefully they don't allow Trump to step in and muck up the whole thing.
Any final thoughts, Mark?
No, I totally. I mean, again, I think Scott's mentioning of Turkey, it's a great thought. You've got to have somebody that really doesn't like either one. would be perfect. Not somebody that likes both of them, because you always like somebody a little bit better to do somebody else, but somebody that doesn't like either one of them, has no ties to this, and says, okay, I want to flex my muscle. Turkey is a good example. My only question would be is if the United States was to give the same ultimatum to the Middle East conflict, Hamas and to Israel, and now you got to include Hezbollah, you got to include Iran, who gets the, if you attack, we're going to let them level you, and who gets the, if you attack, you're at war with us? And I think that becomes, again, the United States has got to stay out of this militarily. It's got to stay out, because there is nothing good that's going to come of that, plain and simple.
Yeah, I mean, for weeks, Iran has been talking about hitting Israel. And for weeks, the United States has been telling Iran, if you do that, we're going to be at war. And don't do it. And they haven't yet. So at least temporarily, so far, that approach has been working. And I don't think Iran wants a war with the United States. And
well, you wouldn't think.
Right. I mean, it would not go well for Iran. And it sends a signal to other countries around the world that, that we're a big bully. We've tried to avoid that, but whereas China has not. And I mean, it's something that we could do, but I think we're better off continuing the way we're doing it now.
Right. And I think you've got to really consider the fact that, okay, let's say we did go to war with Iran. And yes, we would probably just, brush them aside. There's probably little doubt about that. And Scott's right. I think the Saudis would be absolutely gleeful to come in and help a little bit. But then what do you do? Now you've got this territory where basically nobody likes you, as far as the United States is concerned. Now what do you do? Once again, now you're in another kind of Afghanistan. Do you just let the Saudis take it? How would that work out? So, I mean, it's so much more complex than just saying, well, yeah, you go in and you just wipe out the Republican Guard and you wipe out their military and this, that, and the other. But, the people of Iran have been conditioned to hate the United States. And the last thing you want to do is be an occupying force in a country that hates your guts. And I don't know if it'd be a wise thing to allow the Saudis to just take over. So there's a lot to be thought of when it comes to this. So that's all the time we have for today's episode. The Nova Society is a production of the Phoenix Research Institute. We'd like to thank our sponsors for this episode. BH Conflict Resolution Services, a full-service dispute resolution firm offering expert and cost-effective mediation services to couples, groups, and businesses. BHCRS can be reached at www.bhcrs.com. We'd also like to thank our podcast partners, Buzzsprout, who hosts the Nova Society, Audacity, our editing partners, and Podkite, who does all of our analytics. iHeartRadio, where people get their music and podcasts, Apple iTunes, the largest source for music and podcasts on the internet, Spotify, the most popular source for the Nova Society. The Nova Society is available on all of these and other quality platforms. We'd like to thank all of our listeners. Without you, the Nova Society would not be possible. If you have a comment, question, or would like to be a guest on the Nova Society, we can be reached at nova.society.podcast@gmail.com. Always remember, the power of society is knowledge. So for Dr. Scott Gershwer, Dr. Priscilla Hobbs, Dr. Brooklyn Ann Weldon, and all of us here at the Nova Society, I'm Dr. Mark Bound. Be well, and we hope to see you again next time.